Hello everyone, this is Venom Geek Media here, and today's video is just really capping off the fundraising series we've been doing the past few months and weeks. Obviously for Ukrainian refugees, this was with videos about the Klingon invasion of Krios, and now you'll notice there's been a bit of a gap. That's because I wanted to make sure that I finish the Battle of Benzar episode, get that done, and then I was going to kind of cap this off, because there is more I can say about the Klingon invasion of Krios, but I want to do that in a proper format. I said before in the previous video, I want to do that in a proper format for the full storytelling experience. So this is really just a thank you video for everyone who has donated and everyone who's been watching, because your views have translated to donations. So combined with the video revenue that I've made from these, we've raised a total of, well, as it currently stands, $590. Thank you guys so much for your support. Really means a lot to me that you guys got behind this. Maybe it doesn't look as much as compared to other channels, but it's still something, and a little bit of action does actually mean a little bit of difference in people's lives. Sometimes that's all people need. Sometimes small actions can have really big ripples. You just don't know. So thank you guys so much for your donations. And well, things have really taken a turn since I started this series, and things are looking up for the people of Ukraine. They've obviously got a tough fight ahead of them, but I've got a lot of confidence in them that they can do it, and we should all take heart from that. We can maybe avoid the fate of Krios. Now, we'll get into today's video, which is a breakdown on the Orion fleet, and this is because the Orions are pretty crucial to understanding just the entire world of the 22nd century Beta Quadrant, and Krios just as much as anyone else, because they're part of that big Orion web. It's very important to understand the Orions and how they apply power. I mentioned previously in the Pax Orionis video, it's all about control of space lanes and trade routes. So in this video, we're going to look specifically at the vessels they use to do this. So we'll get into it. So it's worth bearing in mind that comparatively, the Orion fleet is quite small. It's subdivided amongst the various clans. So you have a number of different clans and houses, all of whom own their own separate ships, and it's not unknown for blood feuds to break out, so it's not uncommon to see Orion ships shooting at each other. But they are very small but highly trained and highly adept crews who are basically professional spacefarers, and it's basically in their blood. Mostly you can characterize the Orion fleet as being composed of privateers and corsairs, so it's not really organized on any large, grand, strategic scale. There are no, high-level groupings. It's all just down at the, individual clans. If they ever needed to mobilize that kind of military power, they would go to one of their clients and basically get them to do it. So they'd go to the Kriosians or the Rigelians and basically get them to do any real military heavy lifting. So on its own, the Orion fleet is very capable, but it's very small and is reliant on the kind of larger fleet, the larger militaries around it to provide serious protection in the case of a coordinated large threat. So we'll look at the various ships. So we'll start with the most basic ship that we see, and that is the Orion Interceptor. Now, this is actually despite it being the smallest Orion ship, it's still pretty good size for the period. It's less of a scout ship, it's not really at that level, and much more on a sort of frigate or even light cruiser level. It's very fast, extremely fast. We see that it's able to keep pace with the NX-01 and even catch up to it, which indicates pretty good warp for that period, because not all alien ships were capable of outspeeding the NX-01. Essentially, it was designed to police space lanes, probably on a relatively short-range basis. It doesn't look like it has any long-range capabilities. And it would also serve as a radar, so going into enemy territory, and particularly for the taking of slaves. So it was a very good raider, but also good at defending its own space lanes, but kind of locked into probably shuttle runs. It would be very limited in its overall range. So you probably wouldn't see it that much outside Orion territory, other than on short raids. In terms of its armament, it is armed with 4 particle cannons. You can see these across the fuselage. It doesn't really have any heavy ordnance, and that's presumably because the Orion Interceptor is designed to pursue and disable enemy craft rather than destroy them. So that's why it has comparatively quite limited weaponry, especially for something of that size. It's outgunned by the Klingon Bird of Prey, which is a similar sized ship. It has 4 engines, and this is actually reminiscent of the intruder vessel that we see in Journey to Babel. There's probably a deliberate callback, but it's a subtlety. It's a little subtle detail there. So it's very good, particularly in pairs, but it can be outgunned. As I said before, it's not really carrying any heavy ordnance, and it will be outgunned by a Klingon Bird of Prey. It's good, and particularly when it gets to drop on you, it can be quite overwhelming and quite ferocious, but it doesn't really stand up to return fire, so to speak. Right, that now brings us to something a little bit larger, but actually still quite small in the grand scale of things, and this is it's called various things. In Star Trek Online, it's called the Blackguard. In most other media, it's just identified as the Barge, the Orion Barge. This is Harad Sar's barge that is featured in the episode Bound. Now, this is much more of a long-range privateer vessel that is designed to go long way out from home and do trade and privateer work and, whatever it can really pick up. This is a much tougher vessel than the Interceptor. It has a very, very thick armoured shell, as you can see. In fact, some of the weapons can actually retract into armoured housings, though not all. And that just gives you some indication of the level of emphasis and reliance this ship has on its armour. Remember, in the 22nd century, shields are pretty touch-and-go technology still. Some powers make use of them, and some powers rely most, one way or another, rely much more heavily on armour. And this ship definitely is heavily armoured. It also has protected engine units, you can see on the back. It actually matches the configuration of the Bird of Prey of the same period, with the 2 warp nacelles and then the impulse manifold. I wonder if there's somebody was taking inspiration there. But in any case, it's a very good protected kind of engine configuration. It's very easy to defend them. As I said, the turrets can retract. Not all of them, though. And there are a lot of turrets on this ship. This ship has some very heavy firepower to go along with its armour. It has a total of 15 twin gun turrets. Of these, 2 of these are light turrets that are mounted at the very front of the ship on the bridge section. They're very small, difficult to see, but these are basic, probably more point defense if anything else. We don't see them being used. It then has 13 heavy turrets, giving it complete coverage across all arcs of fire. Its prow arc would be able to bring a total of 11 guns to bear, while its broadside could bring 7, and its aft arc can still have 6. This is a very, very well armed ship. There's no getting around that. It also has a torpedo launcher. We do see it use torpedo warheads of some description, fore and aft. They're probably quite primitive warheads, but that's still better than none. As I say, this is a very, very powerful ship. It's only 110 meters, but when you look at the level of bulk that it has and the amount of firepower it crams into this relatively small package, it's probably equal to an NX class, and probably therefore superior to a Klingon Raptor class. So it may even be able to stand up to the Klingon battle cruisers like the D4 and D5. that perhaps depends much more on conditions, but certainly it's got a lot of armor for its size, so it would be a very tough nut to crack, especially when you compare it to the Klingon battle cruisers, which are well armored, but they place a lot more emphasis on agility. So if they do take a hit, they're probably going to fare far worse than the Orions would. So it's a very, very good ship for the period, and very compact and it's a very compact package. Oh, and one other thing. So as I mentioned, it is called the Blackguard in Star Trek Online, and it is grievously miscaled. Despite on Star Trek Online's size chart, which they publish for all their ships, it's listed at the correct cannon length of 110 meters long. However, in game, it is the same size. It is a similar size to the 600 meter long Corsair class. Don't know what's going on there. In any case, it still kind of gets away with it because it's such a bulky ship anyway. But that's just a funny anomaly, and that's why you'll see some very strange scaling in the pictures being shown. That then brings us really to the armoured freighters. Now there's two that the Orions primarily use. The Dacoit, I think that's how you pronounce it, and the Corsair. They're both the same. The Corsair is a little bit bigger, has that double neck structure, but they are essentially the same thing. Now you might say that this is a bit big for the 22nd century, but bearing in mind that these are armoured freighters, less so warships, and that we see actually ships of pretty similar size in the 22nd century, I don't think this is outrageous. But as I say, these are just armoured freighters. They are designed to, bring products and treasure and all that good stuff to wherever the Orions want to sell it, and it's able to protect itself from raiders. It's not a particularly heavy armament. It's got 6 heavy guns mounted across its surface, so it's enough to defend itself, but obviously it's more of a defensive armament designed to dissuade potential pirates rather than an offensive armament designed to be more aggressive. And in terms of that, it's good enough. Only a Klingon would be fool enough to try and take one of these. But as well as its trade applications, which are its main role, it's a merchantman, fundamentally, it can also be used to carry mercenaries. And so if the Orions want to show up and teach somebody a lesson, they can with this, and they can carry quite a few mercenaries inside this thing. So that's really just the Orion fleet. As I say, it's a pretty small fleet with a very narrow selection of ships, but they're all very good specialized ships. You can definitely see how they use this fleet to control trade routes very effectively, and this is what allows them their empire. Now, I will quickly touch on some of the Orion client states. So these are states that are, well, effectively they are notionally the ones in charge, but of course they are basically forming this web of empires that protect the Orions from invasion and also benefit from the Orion trade networks. So the first one I want to touch on are the Malurians. These have massive 1,000 meter long dreadnoughts, as seen in Enterprise's Civilization. These are armoured cargo ships. Similar to the Orion armoured freighters, these are armoured cargo ships, but they're also ore processing facilities, and basically allow for them to go around harvesting resources, harvesting ores, and process them on board while transiting to a trade post where they can sell all that material. These ships are insanely valuable. Now, in terms of their defences, they have a reasonably moderate armament, probably about 4 particle cannons. Powerful, but again, very similar to the Orion armoured freighters, not very aggressive. Its main defense is its armor. These ships are extremely heavily armored. It's almost impossible to penetrate them with most conventional weapons of the time. Maybe your best bet on actually taking one of these ships is by boarding actions, but you've got a lot of ship to board with something that's that large. So these are quite impressive ships, and while they aren't necessarily that formidable in combat, if they show up to a battle, they're going to be a pretty difficult obstacle at the very least. Next up are the Enolians. The Enolians are a client state, and use very hostile and restrictive trade controls and policies and laws, basically to shut out potential rivals to the Orion monopoly. Now, in terms of their ships, they're relatively primitive, but they're very cheap and simple. The Enolian patrol ship is a decent defensive gunboat. It's about 100 meters long and has 6 twin cannons. There's not much more to it, but it's certainly a very simple craft and good export at the very least. So you wouldn't just see these protecting the Enolian systems, you would also see the Orions making use of these as defensive gunboats, and also other powers. But they're just a good defensive gunboat, and that does help provide the Orions with a more cheaper means local system defense. They don't have to splash out on the very expensive and high performance craft like the Interceptor or the Barges. Now we get to the Nausicans. The Nausicans are, of course, thugs and mercenaries. And again, the Orions will use them from time to time. They're not necessarily a formal part of the Orion web, but they are very frequently drawn in and used as cheap cannon fodder. The Raider is very small. It's about 50 meters long. It's decently armed, but pretty primitive. It's got 3 medium cannons, and on either side of those, 6 light cannons. It then also has 6 ordnance tubes, so it's actually a reasonably well-armed ship. But it is paper thin. We can see these things getting taken out by armed merchantmen and NX-class ships. These are not tough. But if the Orions want some cannon fodder to break the front lines, these are very good, and they can just go around and cause whoever you don't like some hassle without you having to commit your nice, shiny interceptors and barges. So that's really just the Orion fleet of the 22nd century. As per mentioned, obviously there's a lot of the client races. You can see the Orion ships themselves are very specialized and very good ships for the time, and that's probably why there are a few of them. The Orions go for a less is more approach and make sure that their ships are well trained and of good quality, and that gives them the ability to exert influence where they need to, while they rely more broadly on their various client states to provide them protection, obviously, and that includes the Kriosians. But you can really see that how the Orion web works and how it protects them. These are ships that would be very much seen in Kriosian space, in the Orion trade lanes, and that the Klingons would be trying to raid. And that basically leads into the Klingon-Orion conflict. Now, there are other ships I could mention, like the Osarians and the Rigelians, but they are significantly less belligerent races, and not really worth getting to in the context of the broader Klingon-Orion conflict, and of course, the fall of Krios, which is part of that series of events. So, like I say, this is it. This is the end of the series. I hope you all enjoyed. Thank you guys again for supporting this series and what I've been trying to do with this fundraiser. And hopefully we'll see a bright future on the horizon for the people of Ukraine. Certainly, I think we have much more reason to hope than when we started. And yes, hopefully as time goes on, we'll see a new day dawn, and peace will once again be restored. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.